Welcome to As I Live and Grieve, a podcast that tells the truth about how hard this is. We're glad you joined us today. We know how hard it is to lose someone you love and how well-intentioned friends and family try so hard to comfort us. We created this podcast to provide you with comfort, knowledge, and support. We are grief advocates, not professionals, not licensed therapists. We are you.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to As I Live and Grieve. We tell the truth. You know that by now. We've been around for over a year, so you know we're telling the truth. And you also know that we're not therapists or anything. We're just you. So we like to have our very casual chats with guests. And today we have a return guest. We always love it when they come back. Our guest today returning is Latisha Porter. Hi, Latisha, and welcome.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I'm doing really good today. Thanks. Excited to hear your discussion about your new book. But before we get started on your book, would you just tell our listeners a little bit about your background?
Sure. Well, my name is Latisha Porter, and I am a wife, a mother of two boys, and I live in the Detroit, Michigan area, and I work full-time as a secretary for an educational district, and I write in the evenings and on my downtime because I just have a love for writing. So that's kind of like me in a nutshell.
Sounds good. I remember from our last conversation, you mentioned you liked writing. So I was very excited when I saw your announcement on Facebook that your book was being released. And I want you to tell us all about it. What did you wind up calling your book, and what motivated you to write it?
Sure. Well, it's called Journal to Overcome Grief, A Personal Journey to Healing. And I wanted to create a safe space for those who are grieving or who has lost a loved one. And I wanted to be able to share a spot where you didn't just read words or just, write thoughts, but you actually was able to have a guided tour, someone who actually went through the same thing. So I kind of gave an introduction to my background, my story, the reason why I created the book. And then I provided the safe space with the journal prompts and different writing activities for the readers to enjoy. And I really think it all came together because it's going to be something for everyone, whether you love to journal or you just want to get ideas of ways that you can remember your loved one. I think I included all of that.
That's great. And, I know every time we mention writing or journaling, somebody, and I can always see the look on Stephanie's face even, I'm not a writer. I don't like to write. I'm afraid to write for whatever reason.
Right.
So explain to us for a minute. You mentioned journal prompts.
Yes.
What are those, and why do they help? How do they help somebody who feels that they are not a writer?
Sure. Well, journal prompts are just questions or statements that can prepare you to gather your thoughts. Like say for instance, when I lost my mom, I would always go back to, Mom, I really miss you because, and then just start writing from there. So it's just giving you a chance to gather your thoughts, be able to focus in on either that thought or that question, and then just go from there. And I feel like if you really don't like writing or you just feel yourself stuck, journal prompts are an awesome way that will take you into that conversation, that inner self, so that you can get it from the inside out onto paper.
Great thoughts. Now, why is it that writing your thoughts down can be more helpful for someone who needs that healing, needs that comfort, that support?
Well, personally, I feel like it's putting it in front of you so you are accountable. You're reading it, you can always go back and reflect on it. And I think that's the most important part, because sometimes when you just lost someone, you're kind of living in a fog. That's how I kind of describe it. And so sometimes you don't have much to say, but I miss them, or I want them back, or why did they have to leave? And then as time goes on, I feel like you're writing even more because you're able to open up a little bit. You're feeling more comfortable. And then it's in your safe space. So you're not forced to write. Some days I just wrote, I miss you. It wasn't a paragraph. It wasn't a sentence. So I just feel like you're working at your own pace. And I think that's what's really important, because we all grieve differently. And if you are able to get it out on paper, you're able to go back at any point. You don't have to sit there and worry about grammar or any of that. You can share with other
Right.
people if you choose to. So it's a personal journey.
Yeah. And I think it's important to mention too that journaling is intended to be for just you yourself. I mean, if you choose to share it with your children or something like that, that's entirely up to you. But if you are journaling, especially if you are grieving and you intend for this to kind of help you heal a bit or help you move forward, and we all know how difficult that can be, especially on some days, then if you keep that thought in mind that it's strictly for you, doesn't really matter what words go down on the paper, in what
Yes.
order, doesn't even matter if they're spelled correctly, because it's only for you, for your eyes. And in truth, you may never look at it again.
That's
But,
true.
who knows? At some point, say a year or even 2 years down the road, you may find yourself looking back at some of your journal entries and thinking, wow, I have moved forward. I have become better. I have healed a bit. So you can use it in that way too.
Yes.
What are some examples? I would imagine, for example, that journal prompts might be memories,
Hmm.
to jot down a particular memory that made you happy or something like that.
Hmm.
Are there other examples of journal prompts maybe that we wouldn't really expect?
Yes. I'm gonna be honest. I feel like there are so many. Normally, like when you're starting the grieving process, and then you know that hopefully you're working towards the healing process. I always try to focus on what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, and kind of going into like, okay, today I'm feeling, and why am I feeling that way?
Right.
Or then you can jump to, wow, I went to that same park that my loved one loved, or, so you can kind of like make it your own, your own
Hmm.
experience. But there's a ton of journal prompts out on Pinterest. I know I always go out there if you get stuck and you just can't figure it out. Try, going out there and grabbing some. But
Hmm.
even, you can just create your own, like for that moment. And I just feel like
Hmm.
it helps you guide the thoughts and the
Right.
experiences. So that way, when you go to write, you're not like, you're like, okay, let me start with a question
Right.
and then go from there. Because normally, if you start with that one question, like, how do I feel today? Or what am I really thinking of today? Or what do I
Hmm.
miss about my loved one? Then from there,
Hmm.
sometimes you find yourself just writing for hours,
Right.
building
Mm-hmm.
on that one question.
Right. Right. And
Mm.
you might even choose a journal prompt about what I'm really angry about is, or what I
Yes.
feel guilty about is. And sometimes that may even help you get those thoughts out of your head, out of your mind. And again, we all know how sometimes your mind can just spin, where if I had just done this, or oh gosh, if I hadn't done that, or if I had said, or whatever. And sometimes those can be really, really devastating for us emotionally. So if you can get them down on paper, again, you can kind of clear it from your brain, I think, and maybe
Yes.
focus on something else. Then maybe move to a prompt that's a little more positive, or
Mm-hmm.
something like that.
When you talk about writing prompts, it hit me. I was like, you know what? You could, if you can't think of one, you can always just go with the old standby one that's right there when you go into Facebook. What's on your
Uh-huh.
mind, Stephanie?
That's true.
That could be one every day for me.
Every single day. It
I
exactly
really
could.
want to know what's on my mind. The other thing is that, I guess journaling could be more, if you get it out there on paper, it's kind of like sitting down and having like a glass of wine or cup of coffee with your best friend
Hmm.
and talking it out. And maybe you're not
Mhm.
going to always feel like talking about your grief or your healing, but getting it out on paper at least will help, get it a little bit of a weight off your shoulders, I think too.
Right.
Yes.
And sometimes we don't always have a friend that's willing to listen all the time.
Yeah.
Especially as things kind of move on.
Right.
Some of our friends, let's face it, they get a little tired.
Don't want to
of
hear it
hearing you say
anymore.
the same thing.
Yeah.
So at least that piece of paper can be your friend.
Right.
Now, another question, Latisha. Does it make a difference if it's pen to paper or fingers to keyboard on your computer?
Okay, I'm going to be honest with that. Now, I personally prefer to write pen to paper because I feel like you're more connected. Now, that's just my opinion. And I know that some people prefer to type or talk into their phone and let the apps do all the writing or whatever. But I feel like if you're really in that dark space and you're trying to get out, writing it out pen to paper is to me the best method because you're forcing yourself to commit to the time. You're thinking, you're trying to get it out, you're using that brain, you're using your hand, your motion, you're moving. And I feel like that's what's key. Because sometimes, when you're typing, you got automatic spell check, you got grammar lines all over the place. And I feel like to me, that's not effective because you kind of want to brain dump is kind of how I look at it. You just want to release. You don't want to think about punctuation, spelling, or any of that. And so for me, it's pen to paper.
Yeah. Wise advice. And I know if I write on the computer, I find myself self-editing as I go along. I can't just get it all out and go back and edit.
That's the secretary in us.
That's the secretary in us. It is. And I find that a lot of times that will interrupt my train of thought. So I agree wholeheartedly with if you are journaling with intention, to heal or just get it down or something like that, pen to paper or pencil to paper. We're not going to be that nitty gritty, but that is going to be, I think, more successful, for the person, something like that. Is your book set up like with a time frame in mind? Like, do you do one chapter, part of a chapter, and then anticipate that a day or a week is going to go by before the next one?
Well, I'm going to be honest. I really thought about that, and I felt like I went back to when I was grieving the loss of my mom. And what I could not find was a guided journal that just pulled me in and didn't just say, write about your feelings kind of thing. So what I decided to do is there's no timetable. But what I did do at the beginning of the journal is I did ask for the reader to commit to the process.
Okay.
Whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a day, just kind of like commit to a time, and you can start anywhere in the journal. So I kind of started out talking about journaling, the process, giving tips about journaling. So I kind of wanted to open it up there. And then I moved into the grieving piece, talking about grief itself, giving my story a little bit about the loss of my mom. And then I went to talk about the 5 stages of grief. And then in each section, I basically kind of gave an intro, gave some of my samples that, different things that I experienced. And then I gave the guided journal prompts. So I was able to kind of like walk through the process. So it's kind of like a guided journal because you're going to get information, but it's really easy reading. And then I give you an opportunity to kind of write out your answers if you choose to, but there's no right or wrong way of doing it. And then I took it a step further and went into different activities that you could do to kind of help yourself, through that process with coping, like writing letters. I even put a space in there, blank pages for you to do like scrapbooking. If you wanted to put a picture. And then again, I gave different prompts in those sections as well. I even provided resources, different books and things that I felt helped me, different blogs. So I've tried to encompass everything and a lot of things that will pull different readers in where they were in that process. And then you also have your blank pages at the end.
Okay. It's I can't wait to read it. This is just on a personal note. Do you like to have music playing in the background when you journal?
Sometimes I do, to be honest.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I write, I listen to gospel, and it's just my preference because I feel like it's a spiritual process.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like sometimes you're sad, sometimes you're happy, sometimes you're numb, whatever the case may
Mm-hmm.
be. And I feel like gospel music kind of pulls you out. Jazz too a
Mm-hmm.
little bit because you don't have
Yeah.
words half the time, but music moves you. It causes you, I think, to feel
Mm-hmm.
more than if it's silent, because I feel like
Mm-hmm.
sometime in the silence you get more emotional and caught up in the feelings, but you're not
Right.
thinking about like, how can I make myself feel better, or how can I get through this? And sometimes the words of the songs kind of help you through that process.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Again, I would agree. Do you have a special place that you like to journal when you're journaling and thinking about your mom?
I'm gonna be honest, outside, but I
Outside.
live in Michigan, so I have to be a little flexible. But my husband, no, seriously, but my husband, he kind of gave me a nice little spot, where my desk area is. And so
Uh-huh.
sometimes I wake up before they do, and then I just, meditate, I pray, and then I'll just write. But
Mm-hmm.
then sometimes I do go outside in our backyard, it's a huge yard. So, you hear the birds chirping, you hear that
Right.
nature, the
Right.
wind. And I feel like it pulls you to a different place.
Mm-hmm.
And so those would be like my two big things, like either when the quiet of the home,
Right.
when everyone is still sleeping, or just going outdoors.
Right.
Do you find that, so from one busy mom
Mm-hmm.
to another, do you find that you can do, because I tend to find like, okay, I've got 10 minutes in this waiting room before this appointment. Do you find that
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you can journal a quick little thing then? Do you try to take any opportunity you can to maybe write something down? Because I feel like that's what I do, is I occupy every second of my day.
You know what? I do.
Okay.
Multitasking is so crucial. And I always have a notebook with me. I don't care like where I'm at.
Right.
Sometimes you find yourself waiting, for your kid, a little
Yeah.
extra, in the parking lot or doctor's office. So yes, I do agree. Like having just your pad with you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's for like anything. Like I just feel like sometimes you can just be sitting there and be like, oh my goodness, let me write down, and I feel
Right.
like that will put you into habit. And
Right.
then, you're always willing to, write this note down or write that word down or that thought or whatever.
Yeah.
And as a writer, you have to be able to do that, because sometimes I can be driving and I'm like, oh, that's a good blog post kind of thing or idea or whatever it is. You know what I
Right.
mean? So you just
Yeah.
want to
Oh,
write
I
Yeah.
it
do.
down.
It's preaching,
Yeah.
preaching to the choir
Yes.
there on that one.
Well,
Yep.
I'm glad you
Yep.
said
Or,
that, because
yeah.
then anyone that is like me that hasn't journaled
Mm-hmm.
or anything, because I almost feel like if I'm going to write, I'm going to need to block out like a good amount of time. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't normally have that. So I guess that's good
Right.
for those newbies for us to hear.
Oh yeah, like any amount of time. I always
Yeah.
tell people, instead of saying in the negative way like, "Oh, I don't have time,"
Mm-hmm.
and that's why I wanted to put that commitment piece in there,
Mm-hmm.
because just like when you grieve, it takes
Mm-hmm.
time.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
throughout that process though, you have to feed into your spirit sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So even if it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes to start, committing to the process is very important, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
journaling or reading or going to a grief counselor or whatever. You're still going to have to commit that time. And so
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really important.
Okay. That's
Yeah.
good.
And even in that 10 minutes, it might only be one sentence, or maybe
Right.
it's two, or maybe it's just a few words put together before they call your name and it's time to close the notebook.
Right.
That's one of the huge advantages, first of all, to pen or pencil and paper, is that
Mm-hmm.
you can capture those few words as opposed to waiting until you have your laptop booted up.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing is, you may find yourself, when you do have a few more moments, you may go back to that phrase
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
consider it a little bit more.
Right.
It might be something, Stephanie, so simple as, oh, I saw a cardinal,
Mm-hmm.
or where the cardinal was, or how the cardinal responded,
Right.
or you saw a stack of Post-it notes and immediately thought of your grandma,
Yep.
things like that. But
Mm-hmm.
those little things, if you journal them, they can later at another time either make you smile like you
Right.
just did,
Right.
or launch you into a more lengthy
Yeah.
journal entry,
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah. I also want to say that in a lot of Facebook groups, I think maybe now it's because spring is finally coming and the nicer weather is coming as well.
Mm.
But I'm finding more and more people, especially those that have lost a spouse, are saying that they can't comfortably sit on the patio anymore because that's where every evening after dinner they would sit together and have a cup of coffee or a glass of wine. Or they can't go to their camp any longer because the presence of that person is so overwhelming to them. Journaling can help those people too. Now, do you think, Latisha, that if they were to attempt to journal when they were sitting or occupying that space that's so uncomfortable, do you think there might be some benefit or that journaling might help them in that instance?
Honestly, I do. Because what it does is it pulls you, you're making it a personal space. And
Right.
then you're going to that uncomfortable space and it's going to pull you emotionally, but then it's also going to allow you to transition that negative kind of fearful kind of to
Right.
something more positive. What I always
Right.
suggest to people is that you kind of think of how you can memorialize them. So say if you always went camping, find either friends or family and may not go to that same campsite, but maybe go to another one. Or you don't want to stop living. And I think that's the hard part because for
Right.
me, it took me months. And that's why I
Right.
wanted to kind of do something to help other people because I feel like what would that loved one want for you? Do they want you
Right.
this depressed and sad and not living? Or do you want to find something to go positive, right? To flip it so that
Right.
now when I look at my journal, I think of my mom and dad now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, this is what I did, thinking about
Right.
I took a dark space and made it into something positive. And I
Right.
think
Yeah.
that's what's really important.
Yeah. And I think in some ways, just like I know I personally felt that I had to kind of redefine and reclaim my life, doing something like that, if it's, again, even if you only sit there for 30 seconds and jot down one phrase or something about the fact that I'm so uncomfortable here. Their presence is so overwhelming, it hurts. It's an attempt, it's the first step almost in trying to reclaim that space to something that you can continue to enjoy by remembering them and not having that absence so powerfully overwhelming. That's just my personal opinion. So sometimes if you can stick it out even for 30 seconds
Right.
at a time and jot something down, it may very well help.
I think it's more so like the spiritual balance, I think, is
Yeah.
another good way.
Exactly.
Well, and I think too, even if someone was if you sat in that space and started writing, you could write a letter to them. You could write
Right.
about your memories in that space or camping or whatever, you were doing. And that, I mean, think of the good things and maybe it'll help turn your
Right.
mind around to something better.
Yeah. 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 And we all know, again, how difficult, and I say we all know because we all grieve and continue to grieve people that we have lost. But we know sometimes that the hardest part of anything is starting.
Right.
Yes.
So if you can just somehow summon up that courage for 30 seconds, 60 seconds, whatever, just really try to do that. I think you'll find yourself well on your way to being able to start journaling and making that commitment to journal. Again, my opinion.
All right, I'll try. How many times have I said? Probably the entire year we've been doing this podcast. All right, I'm going to try.
Well, and I was just going to say that one of the things that draws you, Stephanie, to wanting to journal is the fact that you can go out and buy yourself
Shop
a
for
really
that
pretty journal.
That's true. You know what? That's funny because I do the same thing. Like when I go out, they already know she about to go to the notebooks. I mean, and I just think it's just a personal thing. Like, I don't know. You
Yeah.
always want just that favorite little notebook and different notebook for this and notebook for that. Yeah.
Well, I'll be honest
The
with
fun
you.
part.
Today I actually bought myself a daily planner. So it'll be here in about a week or so. But I liked it because it had a to-do section so I can organize my day, my things to do. But then it has a note sections off to the right. So
There you
this
go.
will
You
be
can journal in that
I'll
note
kind of start
section.
to play because I'll always have it with me. So I'll have that extra room there.
Yeah.
So I'll
There you
start to
go.
do it. Latisha, how long did it take you to write your book?
It took me, I'm going to be honest, about 2 years.
Really?
And I say 2 years because I did not know exactly how I wanted to organize it. And I did know that I wanted more than just blank pages with a title. I wanted more. And it took me a minute to coordinate with different authors and different people.
Mm-hmm.
And then I finally got it, like, okay, I think this is it. I think this is it. So like in 2020, I want to say is when I was able to kind of pull together a lot of different things. And so in 21 is when I kind of got with the book cover, like the artist and that kind of, and so then from there, I was just trying to just make sure it was everything that I wanted it to be.
Right.
So about 2 years.
Right. Well, then you may agree with one of my very favorite quotes. I think it was Ernest Hemingway that said, I love to have written, because sometimes for me, that process of writing can be downright painful, depending on what it is you're putting on paper. But that feeling, so for everyone that's going to try journaling, I'm going to tell you, when you have put something down on paper, even that first phrase, that first sentence, I'm sorry, when you finish and close your journal, you're going to have a feeling that you have accomplished something. And think of that quote. It's a silly little quote, but it's so true. I love to have written. I love when my session is over for the day or the hour or whatever it is. Okay, well, sadly, Latisha, our time is winding down. I always hate this
That
part.
30 minutes
Everybody
goes so fast.
every time I say it, I hate this part, but it's very true. So before we wrap up, we want to allow you a couple moments of time to speak directly to our listeners. Tell them again about your book, where they can buy it. Tell them about your website, what services you may offer, your Facebook group. Just go ahead and tell our listeners whatever you would like them to know.
Okay, sure. Again, it's Latisha Porter. The name of the journal is Journal to Overcome Grief, A Personal Journey to Healing. It's available now via Amazon.com. And my renewinspiration.com website is always available to give you inspiration and encouragement. And also my Facebook group is called Journey from Grief to Healing. So we always look for new members. We're there to encourage one another and to help you cope through grief.
It's a wonderful group. It's one of the ones I belong to. And Latisha, I want to personally thank you as well, on Stephanie's behalf and my own, for the support you extend to our podcast.
Yes.
You share posts, you call attention to our podcast, and we really, really appreciate that very, very much. So I guess it's time. I guess we have to say goodbye for now.
Yes.
At any rate, thanks so much for joining us again. I do hope that now that this book is out, you'll take a little bit of time for yourself, relax.
Yes.
But then I look maybe for another book to come out and hope that you'll keep us posted about that. And we would love to welcome you back again and again. So keep writing. And again, thank you so much for sharing about As I Live and Grieve. To our listeners, take care of yourselves. You are all very, very important to us, wherever you may live. Now we do have an international audience in over 55 countries, and we love every one of you, even though we may never know your names or what you're going through. But take care of yourselves as we all continue to live and grieve.
Thank you so much for listening with us today. Do you have a topic that you'd like us to cover, or do you have a question from one of our episodes? Please email us at info@asiliveandgrieve.com and let us know. We hope you will find a moment to leave a review, send an email, and share with others. Join us next time as we continue to live and grieve together.